Um, Hi everyone. Is Am I audible? All right. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Lakshman, we are able to hear you.
You are? Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
Lakshman, we are able to hear you. Yeah, you can just mute yourself at the time. I think some people might join in by 10:30.
Sure.
Good morning, everyone. Very warm welcome on this Saturday morning. Today we have an eminent speaker with us, a trainer, who's going to let us know some basic, how do you deal with linear regression using R. So he's going to help us with the case study. I'm Shweta. And before we begin, let me just introduce you to him. He's Lakshman. He's BTech from IIT Madras, and he's had a good long career with companies like Citibank, and currently he's with Credit Suisse. So, Lakshman, am I correct? Anything that you would want to add or correct me?
No, you're right. That's it.
All right. So thank you for joining us, and I'm sure your experience and your the way you handle the case and stuff will actually help our students and participants to understand a bit more about analytics. So you may have students asking you questions at the end of the webinar about a career in analytics and how do they go about the next steps and so on and so forth. So maybe you will be a good person to help them because you've had a good experience in analytics over the years.
Yeah, sure.
Right. Thank you. So over to you, Lakshman.
Yeah. So hi everyone. As Shweta introduced, I have been working in this field for 5 years. For now, 5 years with Citibank and recently with Credit Suisse. And and when we were passing out, we didn't have schools like Ivy that would train us. So my learning has mostly been on the job. So I thought I can, give you some perspective on what we learn on the job and what I have in the last 5 years. So to start off, I think you guys don't have the data set. So the data is regarding auto insurance. So you have fields like income, gender, number of times claims have been made in the past, and things like that. I am not sure if that has been shared with you, the data, but it will be soon. So using the characteristics of the customers, we want to come up with the customer lifetime value, the money that the customer is going to make for the auto insurance company. This is a common problem across industries, but it is further enhanced in case of insurance and generally BFSI, where the products tend to be a little sophisticated statistically. Okay, so as you can see, it's a critical aspect across product design and marketing. The product designer will be interested in, am I making money in each segment? If there are segments where I'm not making money, can I shut them off? Can I reject their applications, not onboard them? And the marketing guy is interested in ensuring that the most valuable customers they have are treated very, very well, and that they get in more customers like them who will then tend to be high valued themselves, right? So if you look at the last bullet, the objective of this analysis is to predict future customer CLTV using 2011 data. So these customers, the data that we have, they have an effective date of 2011, somewhere in 2011, distributed throughout the year. And we probably want to predict the customers who walk in today in 2017. We want to look at them and be able to say that this customer is going to make us $10,000 or 50,000 rupees, wherever, right? So how do we approach it, right? The project plan generally flows like this. You start off with data preparation, data for modeling, data for validation, your cross validation scheme and those things. Once you have the data in place, you look for feature engineering. That is, you have some columns. You want to create really powerful features to feed them into the model, which is the third stage, and then come up with an output and test your results on the validation or test data set. Okay. Any questions at this point? Okay. I think that will go ahead. So step one is data preparation. The data that you get in the industry is generally not in a format that can be directly used, because that is not the priority of the business people to create good data for analysts, right? They are more busy in getting more customers, treating them well, and things like that. And in the process, they end up collecting some data. Now it is up to us, when we get the data, to get the right kind of amount for further analysis. So in this case, if you look at this chart, you see that the customer lifetime value goes from 0 to a little over 80,000. However, most of the data actually lies within the 20,000 mark, right? So the red dots that you see are the outliers, the ones that I have defined. There are different methods of statistical techniques to define outliers. Right now I have kept it simple. And one thing about data science is that there might be thumb rules, but they may not work across data sets. And that is where data science, the science part in data science kicks in. You have to test each data for different things and figure out where to count, to decide your thresholds, your cutoffs, your outlier definitions, your model, final model, and things like that. Okay, now here roughly I have taken 20,000 as the cutoff. You can start off with the proven statistical technique, see if it works, change it a little bit, see how it goes for you. Okay, so this is the first step. We have to do this here because linear regression penalizes outliers very heavily. Okay, so if you're aware of how the algorithm works, if most values are within 20,000 and one value is at 80,000, the slope will change significantly, because what we are trying to minimize is the mean square error rate, right? So that difference is heavily penalized. Now, coming to step two, once we are done with outliers, we split the data set into three parts. 60% of the data goes into the training set. Validation is 20%. Here we check for performance on the training. So definitely if we apply an algorithm on the training data, it will give us fantastic results, right? But we want to test if we are overfitting the training data set, if we are overfitting the model on the training data set. If we aren't, it should work on the validation as well, correct? And once we are done with these two, finally for reporting results, we will use a third data set called the test set. Okay, now for those of you who are thinking, why do we need three? And why not just two? You train data on one set and you validate it on another and report the results. Do you have any thoughts on why we need three data sets? Anybody? Sorry. It's not very... Yeah, so okay, so in a way, what you're saying is you want a... So Ria says that it is to understand how robust the model is, right? And in a way, she is correct. So the way it works is you generally want to test multiple algorithms with different uh, uh, columns selected with different data transformations and everything, right? So your test and validation is where you play with multiple algorithm, multiple feature selection, multiple whatever you want. Okay. But when you do that with two data sets, there is always a chance that you have overfitted both the data sets, right? So you want to come up with you want to prove that the third data set results match the second one. So for example, if I fit a model on the training data and it has an error rate of 10%, and then I validate it and I see that the error rate is 20%, then I don't like that difference. So what I do is I change something in the original model and then I test it again on the validation one. Now the training error has gone up to 11%, but the validation error has come down to 13%. Now I am happy. I am saying, okay, it generalizes a little bit, right? If I keep doing this multiple times and I get errors that are very, very close, 11.5% and 11.5%, I'm very happy that after 500 models that I built, one model gives me very similar results for training and validation. So then I can intuitively decide that this model generalizes. But coming to that conclusion is bad data science, because what you have done here is you have overfit to both the training and the validation data. The only way you can... Sure. Okay, so I'll repeat. If you test 500 models on the training data and you validate it with only one data set, there is always a possibility that you find some obscure model that fits both just by chance. It is not that this model will generalize on an unknown data set tomorrow. Correct? So you take one data set, you take another data set. On data set 1, you fit something. On data set 2, you see if it fits or not. Okay, it doesn't. Now let me try another model. Let me fit something else on data set 1. On data set 2, okay, it fits a little better, but not the best. Now if I keep doing this 500 times, there will, just by chance, not because your model is great, just because there is a chance that there is a common model for both dataset 1 and dataset 2. So then what you have done is you have built a brilliant model for dataset 1 and dataset 2, but you have no idea if it will generalize to dataset 3, 4, 5, 6 to 5000. Finally, the aim of data science is to build a model that can generalize to any unknown dataset tomorrow, right? So it's a lot like induction. What you will say is dataset 1 gives me good results. Dataset 2, which is the validation dataset, also gives me decent results. Yes, training is dataset 1, validation is dataset 2. Validation results are also okay, but the model is worth its salt only if the final dataset 3 results are close to dataset 2 results. If you see the dataset 1, that is your training data, has an error of 10%, validation data has an error of 11%, and your final unknown data, that is the test data, has an error of 30%, you have only overfit to your training and validation dataset. This model will not generalize to an unknown data. What you're interested in is you will tune your model. Yeah, it has to. Yeah, so it would be a mistake to consider your validation data as an out of sample data, because you are constantly using it to verify that your model is doing well. So in some ways, that validation data is a polluted out of sample data. But this third data set that we have kept, which is the test data, is untouched. It is sacred. So if your model works on this data, we can say with confidence that it will work elsewhere also. Correct? If you keep testing and validating on the same data sets, eventually you will find a model that fits both of them, but that may not generalize. That is why you need 3 data sets, and it's a very crucial thing, because for people who are very happy building a good model on dataset 1, dataset 2, and who implement things directly, they are going to be in for a shock when your model doesn't work in the real world. So cross validation is, so when you build a bad model, immediately you see the results. Okay, the error is bad or whatever, with maybe we can improve it. But if you have a faulty cross validation set, the future is going to suffer. The result will directly arrive once you have implemented your model, and then you will see that it doesn't perform very well. So cross validation scheme is very important. We have used this scheme where we have a training set, we have a validation set, and we have a test set that we do not touch. Sorry? Is anyone saying anything? Okay, I will continue. So this is the data preparation step. It's very critical. After this, we get to feature engineering. So your data will have some columns. This step aims to convert those columns into powerful features using which the model can give you an output, right? So what does it do? It takes your column or your feature, it applies a function on it based on your target variable, and it gives you a transform feature. So for example, if you look at the third bullet, your profit may not depend on revenue or expenses alone, but the difference between them will be highly predictive, because profit is revenue minus expenses, right? So what did you do? You looked at the target, which is your profit. You looked at the features, which is revenue and expenses, and you looked at a function, which is subtraction, and you came up with a transform feature, which is revenue minus expenses. Correct? Similarly, most algorithms don't take character inputs. So if you have, say, gender, male and female, it will randomly assign 0 to male and 1 to female, or the other way around. It is not going to think about what is the target value depending on, it's male or female, does it differentiate? It just says this is level 1, this is level 2. Is there a difference between the two? So we need to be careful when converting those character inputs into numeric ones before we feed it into the model. Okay. and of course date characteristics. The date itself may not make sense, but if we extract features like month or weekday, for example, while shopping malls might see a spike on Saturday and Sunday. So if they want to analyze their sales over time, the date itself may not be very significant, but the weekday might be. Monday to Friday, lull period. Saturday, Sunday, highly predictive. So then you need to extract those components of date to test if this is significant or not. So this is feature engineering. Now, as I described, feature engineering is different for different types of features. One of the columns could be, so the columns could be characters, right? India, Australia, South Africa, England, whatever. How do you transform that to get a feature for your model? The simplest and possibly the least effective way is label encoding. So you randomly assign an integer to each of your character levels. So India would be 1, Australia would be 2, and it won't mean anything. Now remember, for linear regression, we want these features to have a linear relationship with the final target variable. So if I am looking at ranking points in cricket, then I am better off assigning a high value to India and Australia than to a Bangladesh, because I know that if I assign high values to India and Australia and less to Bangladesh, I will get a nice straight line which will fit the final ranking points variable. Correct? That is the second point, which is target encoding. You replace with average Y for that label. So you can even look at GDP or number of items produced or something like that, and you look at the average for this level, whatever your target. So in our case, if our average Y would be average of CLTV. So male would be replaced with average customer lifetime value for males, and female will be replaced with average customer lifetime value for females. This is both convenient and it works, especially for linear regression. It is convenient because you don't have to convert features with high cardinality. So if you have a zip code which has which can take 500 values, then for each of it will retain your data in that one column, and it will replace it with the average for each zip code. This is one of the effective ways of dealing with character variables. Another way is one-hot encoding. Okay, what this does is it creates new binary features. So in the example that we just considered, where we said India is 1, Australia is 2. Let's see. No, by character inputs, I mean character variables, which could be gender or number of doors in the car or number of engines in the car. So in the auto insurance case, it could be things like that, right? So those are okay. That variable is still ordinal, but you understand variables where they're just characters. So it could be names, things, something like that. So you cannot arrange them in an order. So that becomes an issue. So you have to convert it to some kind of a numeric form. Now, one-hot encoding, what one-hot encoding will do is it will convert your country variable into multiple variables. So if country can take value India, Australia, South Africa, England, and so on, it will create a new feature for everything. So country int will be 1 when your country is India, otherwise it will be 0. Country os will be 1 when the country is Australia, otherwise it will be 0. but correct. So these are okay. You can call them dummy variables. What we are creating. So with label encoding or target encoding or one-hot encoding, you are creating dummy variables. Okay. So this is that. And if you notice, you will get these slides later on. At the bottom, I have shared a link. You will see all my codes there. Whatever I have done, it's a GitHub link. You have access to my code if you want to play around with the data. Now coming to date features. So as I mentioned, date features can be transformed into one is the number of days from a reference date. Now in this case, we all our dates are in 2011. Effective to date is a variable and it has values ranging from 1st January 2011 to 31st December 2011. The reference date way of transforming date features is calculating the number of days from a certain date. Now, for example, in number of days before 1st January 2012, this dummy variable will have values from 1 to 365 because all my date values lie between 1st January 2011 to 31st December 2011. I can look at the number of days from 1st January 2012 and call this variable days from 2012. Fair enough? This is one way of doing it. Another way, as I mentioned, is year, month, day, etc. So you look at so in this case, year is useless because all the year values are 2011. Month and day are variable, so we can look at that. Right. Another interesting case that I had seen was when I was working with some stock data in the past. I saw that all the major stocks moved upwards more often than moving downwards just before a holiday. So if the markets are closed tomorrow, say it's Diwali tomorrow, today the markets are going to move up. Okay, so then I need to add another external data, which is holiday or no holiday. And then I need to look at the date and see if the next day is a holiday or not. Right? So you can use your own creativity to come up with these transformations. Something that you think will be useful. You come up with a hypothesis, you test it, and then you see if it works or not. So for example, in the date feature transformation, I tried days from 2012. I got very little correlation. I looked at month, very little correlation. Weekday, very little. So then in that case, I just ignored the date variables. Iska kuch nahi ho sakta. That way, right? Yeah. Okay, so you are talking about the reference generally, is it? So what you can do is one way of transforming it is looking at the number of days from a certain reference date. Okay, let me just ensure I'm getting a thing right. Yeah. So reference date, that is number of days before a certain date. Now, so a good example of reference date would be an age variable. Okay. Now, if I want to find out the probability of someone shopping online and I have only their birth dates. Okay. So the reference date variable will effectively calculate their age, and I believe it will be a strong feature it will be a strong feature when it comes to predicting whether this customer is going to shop online or not. So if the birth date is 1st January 1989, the reference date variable will say this customer is 28 years old. And using that age variable, which if you notice is a transformed date feature, I can then figure out if this customer is likely to purchase the product or not. That is an example of reference date, creating age variable from a day, from a birth date. Okay. And the other cases, like I explained, would be getting the year. So if the date variable is 1st January 1989, the year part of that variable will be 1989, month part will be 1, and day part will be whatever date it was. Does that solve it? Okay. Okay. Now coming to numeric features, right? So numeric features are already in a way in which we can feed them into the model, but we still want to see if there are cases where there isn't a linear relationship between our variable and the target variable, but there is a logarithmic relationship, or maybe y is not highly correlated with x, but it is highly correlated with x square. Every time I hear that ping, I feel someone is okay. So in this case, I have explored transformations like logarithmic. So looking at correlation between the target variable and logarithm of the given variable. Then there is exponential and polynomial. So I ran a for loop. I took one variable at a time, looked at its logarithm, looked at the correlation with the target variable, looked at its exponential form, looked at its polynomial form, looked at their correlation, and ran this for loop for each variable, each of the numeric features, right? And okay, sorry. So the numeric features that we have, numeric or integers either. One is the total claim amount. Now this table shows you the best correlation for each transformation. So total claim amount, for example, has a correlation of 0.23 with the CLTV without any transformations. And this is the best one. So the logarithmic one, exponential one, and the polynomial one might have slightly lower correlations than this. Okay. Then there is income, where the polynomial function gives you the best correlation. And there was one variable where the logarithm significantly improved correlation from the variable itself. Yeah, I think it is a number of policies. The number of policies, the logarithmic transformation has a correlation of 0.34, whereas if you look at the number of policies variable itself, it has a correlation of 0.19. This translates into a R square gain of some 9%. If you look at R square, finally, you can once you get the data, you can play with this and you can use my code and figure it out yourself. So this is how we can play with numeric transformation features. Actually, in my GitHub, I have also, in some other project, I've also shared a code where I have multiplied features. So total claim amount divided by monthly premium auto, for example, might be a strong feature, right? So that code, what it does is it takes one feature, two features at a time, divides them and checks for their IV. I've used IV because it was a binary feature. You can also look for correlation with the target variable. Okay, so numeric, there's a lot of scope for playing with numeric features. You can, it's one of the best things about data science. You can just keep playing, you can try this, you can try that, something works, something doesn't work. And it's not even a lot of effort. You just put a code on run and then you can just go out and enjoy yourself. Now that we have created features, we have a bucket of available features for our final model. Okay. this is the part where you try to pick out the best model using the data preparation that we already did in the first step, using the feature transformation that we did as the second step. This is the third step where you pick the best model. How do you do that? You pick some features, run an algorithm on it, look for the VIF. First you look for the VIF, which is variable inflation factor. In linear regression, you want to avoid multicollinearity because it does not give you a very stable model. So for those of you who don't know about multicollinearity, if y is dependent on x, right, and I put that x column twice, then if y is equal to x, then there is no way for you to figure out what are the ideal coefficients for those individual x's. For x1, it could be 0.9 and x2, it could be 0.1. Or for x1, it could be 0.8. For x2, it could be 0.2. Anything that adds up to 1 is a feasible solution, right? So the model coefficients will be unstable. It can be 0.9, 0.1, 0.8, 0.2, and so on. Of course, this simple case, it will just throw you an error saying this transformation is not possible. But there are cases where x1 and x2 are highly correlated, and in that case, the model does not know how much weightage to assign to x1 and how much to assign to x2. Okay, Hitesh, I have shared my codes here. I have mentioned it in my in the presentation itself, if you don't have it, but I'll share it here for the group. Okay, and Saurav, you don't intuitively know that polynomial transformation is best for this and not for logarithm. You test it out with a code. So, for example, look at this code. What I have done is, for each variable, okay, for each, sorry, can you just type it? So anyway, for the which transformation is best for income and not algorithm, you can look at this numerical transformations.r code. It will show you how I have run for loops for each variable, and I have kept the transformation that works best. It could be no transformation, it could be exponential, it could be anything. Okay. Yeah. Now coming to model tuning, like I explained VIF. So you want to exclude variables that are already explained by other variables, right? So retail, for example, uses a different limit for VIF. Banking uses a different one. It generally depends on your use case. You can try different values of VIF and see what works best on your validation dataset. Okay. Generally, there are rules of thumb. You can Google them. You'll find them on Stack Exchange. But the best way and the easiest way, I think, is to just write some code, run it, and see which one does best. And of course, all this playing around and tuning and whatever you want, you can do that, but never touch the test data because you don't want to pollute it. Finally, it has to show that what you have done makes sense. And if it doesn't, you recreate your training, test, validation, everything, and then you start from scratch. Okay, that is just doing it right. Okay, so this is the model tuning part. You select some features, you apply a VIF threshold, ignore some of those features, you run a model, validate it, and see if the validation agrees with the model performance in the first place. And then you keep, if it doesn't, you keep doing, you repeat it, repeat it, and finally use the test data once you have decided that this is my model. And the way you validate the entire process is your validation error rate should be close to your final test error rate. If it isn't, you have just overfit the validation data set, like people tend to overfit the training data set, right? So the final test of your process is validation error is more or less equal to the test error. What is the optimum number for splitting the data to test? It depends on the size of your data set. So generally, you want a sample that can, show you statistically significant results. So in this case, we have only 9,000 data points. So to be on the safe side, I have built a model, and I think I get 5,500 for test and some 1,700 for the validation. 5,500 for training and 1,700 for validation. If you have a lot of data points and not a lot of features, then you can reduce that validation data to 10% also. But in this case, we had some 25 features and 9,000 points, so I split it into 5,500, 1,900, and I think 1,900. So that is the model tuning. And finally, after this, I didn't do any tuning, I just finished the model. So yeah, so these are the results. The good thing is, first of all, the bad thing is that the error rate is high. So this certainly needs some tuning. So MAPE is a mean absolute percentage error. In a model like this, where your outliers can go up till 80,000, when your average customer value is some 6,000, you will expect some MAPE. This can be reduced by tuning your model, running loops, seeing where your validation and test results, validation and training results are at a minimum, right? But the good thing is that the results match, that we have not overfit anything. Our results are very similar across validation and test. So these results can be generalized. So when you tune your model and you say you get a validation error of 30% MAPE, you can go back to the business and say, with your features, with your columns, I can predict the CLTV with an accuracy of around 70%, MAPE being 30%, and it generalizes outside. If you can use it, well and good. If you want to give me more data, I can create better models, more number of columns, more number of rows, everything will help. Okay. In industry, we also go back and tell them, why do we have so many outliers? What do they mean? Is this garbage data? Can you remove the garbage data and come back to us, because it is affecting our modeling process? So these are this is the way it generally works. But this is a very industry-like case where nothing is black and white. You don't have an exceptional model performance. You never do. The data is always faulty. It has a lot of garbage. So you will always face things like this. Okay. Now, one more comparison is with the baseline mode, with a baseline model. So, okay, that's model. So we need to look at, one of the ways of comparing your model performance is comparing it to the baseline model, which is the worst model possible, which is basically no model at all. What is the baseline model? It is, in this case, just taking the average. So average, if I apply the average CLTV for all the rows, what is the error rate that I get? Okay, that is 79%. So the data itself is error prone because there's a lot of variation in uh, in CLTV. So 79% is a baseline model. We have improved it to 39% with further tuning and your creativity. I am sure you can reduce the error further to maybe 30, 25 or whatever percentage. Okay, so this is how we report our results. So I think we are ahead of time. We have 13 minutes. So any questions? I think the chat message was, the chat column was working fine. Yeah, you will. So this is what whatever shared. Yeah. So I'll open the link in front of you. If you open it in a new tab, there are no accesses or anything. It's all public. You will get this. Once you reach here, the .r files are all R codes. Okay. So this is data partitioning. This is date features. This is character features, target encoding. This is numerical transformations. These are the results, and this is VIF. No problem. Yeah, they should. I think, I don't know when they will. I think Sweta will be the best person to answer that, but they will be sending the data. You can divide it. So, but why would you want to do that? You can. So the idea yeah, we can. Okay, one is cross validation. Cross validation is what we have done, but there are different validation schemes. So you can do k-fold cross validation. So what you can do is you can split your, so you first remove a test data, the final test data, and instead of having training and validation, you split the dataset into say 5 parts. Then you build models. Okay, one second. First, let me answer Subhash's cross validation thing. So you can do it on multiple folds. You have the training plus validation data set, right? You split it into 5 parts. You build your model on 4 parts at a time. 1 part separate. Test it on that. Then you build a model on some other combination of 4 parts. Right? Keep one for test, and you come up with the average error. That is fold cross validation. You can do that as high as the number of data points you have. So that is cross validation. I wanted to keep it simple here, but generally when I am building complex models, I generally use 4 or 5 fold cross validation. Because 4 or 5 is generally ideal for me because it doesn't increase the computation requirement so much. So if I do n fold cross validation, it requires too much computation. So I'll build n models, keep one data point as a test, and keep testing on them. I'll get n models and n results. but that is an overkill for me. I generally stick to five to validation. Now coming to Nikhil's question as to whether splitting training further into training and validation. If you just split training into training and validation, I don't think it will give you a more tuned. I can't think of a reason why it will give you a more trained model. The reason why we come up with three splits, that is test, validation, and training, validation, and test, is if I build something on training, I want to check if it generalizes reasonably. So does it work on validation? And then I have a test to ensure that I have not just that if it works on a validation, it also works on a test with more or less the same accuracy. So then once it works on a data set that we have never seen, more or less the same accuracy, we can say that okay, it will work many more with more or less the same accuracy. That is why we need three. If you want to create more splits to better tune, I suggest you take Sivash's idea and do k-fold cross validation. It's a better way of. Okay, now coming to Saurabh, do I need to convert categorical value to numeric, or the system will, the system has a so for example R will convert it to numeric by using one hot encoding. Okay, that is the default way. So if you just run an R model on categorical variables, you will notice that it creates new variables saying country and country or whatever. Country South Africa, country England. That is one hot encoding. It may or may not be the best way to do it. For a tree-based model, one hot encoding might be better than anything else. Target encoding can be can give it some contest, but for linear regression, I think target encoding will give you a linear relationship ready-made, so it can work better. That is my view. Now, so to answer your question, yes, the system will convert it to numeric in a particular way. Okay, one second. I'll come to Subhash's next question. I have a question related to multiplicity, as I have seen a lot of people where this only after removing insignificant variables from model value by inflating them. So why not check for VI before deciding on inflating? Yeah, you can check for multicollinearity in right from the beginning, but what will happen is if you have 1,000 variables, okay, and you have some first, so multicollinearity, you will have to do it step by step. You'll have to remove the first variable and then you will check if there is any more multicollinearity. So if there are 1,000 variables and you have to remove 500 variables, insignificant, it can, but then it will still keep the other variable. So if there is multicollinearity between one variable and say three, so three variables are explaining one variable, it can make some of those insignificant. That is true, but generally what will happen is one of those will still come up to be significant and make it to the final model. So removing so it's a trade-off. You remove multicollinearity in the first step, right? And then it's a very computationally intensive process where you have 1,000 variables, you remove one of them at a time and you arrive at 500, and then you realize that the 500 that you removed, most of them were insignificant anyway. Rather than that, you need the variables that didn't come out to be very significant, remove them in the first place and act like you never had them. It's just a trade-off. It makes your life easy, and it might affect your model performance in some cases, but generally it works fine. That is my view. Then Om is asking which method to use for train and test. By KNN. No, that is up to you. In my if you want to use Split, you want to create data partition or anything. I use my own code. I don't rely on those functions. I just randomly jumble up the sample and then I pick the first 5,500, next 1,500. But it is important that it is random. So my first step is always jumbling up the data, so which sample statement will do, and then after that I just pick the first few columns, next few columns, and next few columns. But you can use Split or create data partition or anything. And I don't think they are really. I don't think a model performance is going to get affected by that. So you can choose any of the ones that are commonly used to create to partition the data. Then, apart from MAPE, is there any statistics that we should look at to conclude best linear model? Uh, I prefer MAPE because there are variables there are statistics that look at the squared difference and things like that. So there are variables like that. There are statistics like that, but for me, MAPE works when it comes to linear regression. I think it is the most intuitive way of figuring out if it doesn't assign. So if you look at those squared statistics, you will penalize the outliers very heavily. MAPE takes care of all that. That way. Variable selection method forward. Yeah, I have also not looked at heteroscedasticity in this case. I think there are some transformations that people do, but I have rarely faced the problem with it. My focus is on prediction. If the prediction works, well and good. Otherwise, so I don't really check for heteroscedasticity very often, and neither do my colleagues. That then variable selection methods, forward, backwards, or any other. So I always prefer. Yeah, of course, it's stepwise. So it's up to you. I First of all, I first select features that have some correlation with the final data. If I'm doing linear regression, because correlation and R square are related. Once I have that, uh, I generally I think I leave it to the algorithm. I generally prefer backwards because I don't want to miss out on anything that can be added but didn't get added because of something already. Backwards, what it will do is with everything inside, it will remove the ones that are least important. Whereas forward is a very greedy algorithm. So every time you take one route, you take the other route, it can lead to totally different models. So I prefer backwards. So there is an information package in R with which you can do that. I will information. Okay, so you just install this. You have an IV function here. Okay, I wrote my own function. I divided the data into 10 parts, and for each variable, I calculated IV. This was also, I think I found it somewhere. But yeah, I would recommend that you use information, the package, and it will show you how to. There is a information feature table that will tell you how to get that. Yeah, yeah, no problem, Ria. Oh, okay. Yeah, I think Riya shared. So I think I'll let you all go. It's 11:32, right? And I hope you all had a good time. I did. So all the best. Do well. I hope our paths cross in the future. We are working together somewhere in analytics. Okay. Yeah. Bye.